are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on this video. I'm Brooke Makenna, but today's case is from Circus Act to Murderer, the Grady Stiles case. Now, a man who used his differences to make money but also inflict pain. I'm telling you, this story will have you gripping your fists with anger due to the injustice by the end of it. By the way, I post so much content like this. It's my passion to tell these stories, so if you would like to support me, all you have to do is subscribe and watch these videos, and it would mean the world. Now let's get back to the story. I do want to give a quick thank you to the last podcast on the left because they did such a wonderful job researching this case. I did find some articles, but most of the information did come from them because they did such a brilliant job, and there's not a ton due to the fact that this is a vintage case. So it was Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and the Stiles family lived here, except for they were often referred to as the lobster family. They all had a rare medical condition named electrodactyly, and this is basically also called lobster claw syndrome due to the fact that your hands can kind of have a deformity where your thumb and your pointer finger are merged together and your pinky and your ring finger are merged together, and then you don't have a middle finger, so it kind of appears to be claws that you have, and you can also have these on your feet. Now, the Stiles family was said to have this condition going all the way back to the 1840s. However, fast forward to 1937, and this is when Grady Franklin Stiles Jr. would be born to Grady Stiles Sr. and Edna. And his father shared the same condition with him, and because of this, they kind of started to travel around in the circus to make money off of what some would describe as their misfortune. Now, many people describe them as monsters of men, and they would spit on them as they walked around. And so this is how they ultimately made money, and their family is off of what some really thought was such a horrible thing. They turned into profit. Now, their son Grady was 7 at the time, and he was being bullied mercilessly for the fact that he had this deformity, and also he had it on his hands and his feet, so he couldn't even walk. He had to have a wheelchair to get around, and so at this age his family decided to take him out of school and put him in the circus with them. His father was known as the Lobster Man, and his son Grady was going to be known as the Lobster Boy. And their family was part of a 1 in 10, which is a 10-part circus act under one tent that people could go in and see for a dime. Now, this is how Grady grew up, and many really loved his act. He even taught himself to crawl on his hands to get around when somebody wasn't there to push him on his wheelchair, and he was really extremely strong, and people said that he was faster on his hands than most were on their feet. And Grady could write, he could play baseball, he really did anything he wanted. He didn't let his condition stop him in any way. He was just as able physically as anybody else, except for mentally was a different story. Now, he didn't have any sort of mental disability. That's not what I'm saying, but he did develop some anger issues over the years, and this really stuck with him through life. This could have been from the bullying, it could have been just something he grew up having issues with, but it's something that he never really grew out of. But he wasn't this angry, volatile man all of the time, and in 1959 he met a 19-year-old Mary Teresa who had just joined the circus. She had run away from her abusive father, and she didn't have any sort of deformity or anything that could make her a real act on her own. But they always needed workers to help out in the circus, and so she did so, and Grady put the charm on her, and she fell in love with him. Eventually, Mary did get her own act in the circus. She was dodging knives at first, and then they strapped her to a fake electric chair, and she was known as the Electrified Girl. And at this point, this is when Grady also fell in love with her, and they decided to kind of be together. They moved to Gibsonton, Florida, and got married 9 years later. They had a daughter named Margaret, who unfortunately died pretty quickly afterwards of pneumonia. Same with their next son, David. But Donna was their first child that survived, and surprisingly, she didn't have this lobster claw syndrome that ran in the family. However, their next daughter, Kathy, did. Now, Grady and Mary divorced at this time, and it was said to be because Mary fell in love with a man named the Midget Man, who was also another circus act, and that is why they were getting divorced. However, what many didn't know was that Grady was extremely abusive, and he would often hit Mary with his claws and kind of choke her with them as well, and he would do things in places where the public really couldn't see the bruises, and this would happen when Grady was drinking. He was extremely abusive when he was drinking, and one night he was even said to have thrown Mary on the ground and ripped out her IUD, or her birth control that is inserted down there. He ripped it out with his claws because he was just so angry. Grady was even said to sometimes abuse his children, and if they weren't moving fast enough, he would grab them by their hair with his claw and throw them outside. And what many didn't know was that Grady seemed like this innocent man who kind of had a harder time because he had this disability and was in a wheelchair. However, he was more capable than anyone realized, and much stronger as well. Grady remarried later on to a woman named Barbara and moved to Pittsburgh, where they had a third child in 1976. It was known as Grady the Third. Now, he also had lobster claws, and there were now 3 in the family who did, and so they all began to travel as this like one big huge family known as the Lobster family. Grady did have custody of all 3 of his children, and this was because Mary was never really told that there was going to be custody hearings for her children, and so she didn't attend them, and of course because of this Grady got his children. But at this point, after he had had another child with Barbara, Mary contacted him and said, "Can I please see my daughters? I really want to see my children. Can I come see them?" And Grady said, "Oh yeah, sure, but we're gonna meet at the bar first and hang out there for a while." And so Mary did with her husband to this bar, and Grady got really drunk there, and then he brought them back to his house and he pulled a gun on them, and he also had another guy there with a gun, and he basically said that if they didn't leave him alone that he would shoot them. And so they were really never going to bother him again. Grady was still being an abusive drunk all these years later, and his eldest daughter, Donna, was now 15 years old and done with the treatment. She fell in love with an 18-year-old named Jack Lane Jr., and she ran away with him only to be caught by her father, who said that if she didn't come home, he would kill Jack. Donna at this point told her father, "I'm pregnant. That is why I decided to run away." And this was a lie at this point, but it did get Grady to calm down a little bit, at least for the moment. Now Donna and Jack were going to get married, and it was 1978, the day before the wedding, and Jack, Mary, and Donna were all out to get a dress for her when they got home, and they saw that Grady had lost his wheelchair. It's something apparently he did often. He was of course always drunk, so he would sit random places and misplaced his wheelchair. He could get around on his hands, so it wasn't that big of a deal. Mary and Donna went out to search for it, and Grady asked Jack to stay behind, which is something he of course was going to do, and he would end up with 2 gunshot wounds to the chest. And when Donna ran inside, she found her father looking over Jack, smiling. And Grady confessed pretty easily to the police, and at trial he was convicted of 3rd-degree murder due to the fact that he had a disability, and he definitely had his lawyers play that up. Now, Grady was found guilty in 1979, except for he never went to jail. By this point, Grady had cirrhosis of the liver and emphysema due to alcoholism and smoking for years, and the judge admitted that the prison was not equipped to care for an inmate with this issue, so basically for whatever reason they reduced his sentence to 15 years only and sentenced him to probation and house arrest instead. He allegedly then told reporters that he could kill them and get away with it because he already had. At this point, Grady left town and started his own small circus, and 10 years later, Grady would remarry his first wife, Mary, because she thought that he was better. He had stopped drinking throughout these years, and Mary really thought that he was a changed man. However, he was no better because he started drinking once again, and his abuse got worse. He thought that he was invincible and could never actually go to jail if anything happened, so he just got more and more aggressive and abusive, and 3 years later, Mary would have enough of this abuse once again. But this time, she wasn't going to just walk away. You see, Mary and her son from her previous marriage named Harry were going to hire a 17-year-old boy. His name was Chris Wyant, and he was their neighbor and fellow sideshow performer, and he often bragged about the different killings that he did with the drive-by shootings, and Mary and Harry allegedly offered $1,500 to do something for them. And on November 29th, 1992, Grady was sitting in his rocking chair watching TV when he was shot in the back of the head 3 times. Now, police at first thought it was a robbery, but then they found his wallet with a whole bunch of money still in it, so they ruled that out. And Mary and Harry had left just a few minutes prior to him being shot. No one in the family really seemed sad about his death at all, and so they were really catching on to what had actually happened. And Mary then confessed to the entire plan. Chris was found guilty of second-degree murder and given 27 years in prison. Mary was given 12 years, and her son Harry was given life in imprisonment for basically being the mastermind. However, Grady's youngest child, Grady III, was left in the house that night when Mary and Harry left. He was asleep, so they just left him there, and he had heard the gunshots. He remembers waking up, but he just thought it was some sort of argument between Mary and his father, because they often argued, and so he just went back to sleep. He really has said in recent years, as he's grown older and interviews, that he doesn't think Mary had actually contacted the 17-year-old to murder Grady. That what really happened was that Mary and Grady had argued that night, and Mary had said something to Harry about something needing to be done about Grady, but she didn't necessarily say, you know, we need to hire a hitman, but Harry did go over to the neighbors and kind of just mention something, and that is when Chris took it into his own hands to kill him. I mean, this case drives me crazy. An abusive man murders an innocent, yet gets probation, and then an abused wife gets her horrible husband killed, and everybody is put in prison. I mean, yes, I get that murder is murder, and Mary didn't do the killing herself, meaning it wasn't in self-defense, and they had to prosecute her. But how in the world did they let Grady go for his murder? I think we often look at people and make assumptions, and I mean, yes, he had a disability, but that didn't make him dumb, and it especially didn't make him weak. And just because he didn't seem harmful didn't mean he wasn't going to do it again. Do you think Mary hired this hitman? I mean, or do you think her son had it done for her? I can truly see how her son could have been fed up with her seeing his mother abused and went to this next door neighbor and just kind of mentioned it, because who better to go to than a crazy, already murdering next door neighbor? It seems like the perfect person to go to in this situation. But I'd love to hear your theories. It's kind of a heartbreaking case, and it's horrible to see that people with disabilities and deformities were mocked and people paid to go and see them like they were zoo animals. It breaks my heart. However, I am happy that they kind of got money out of it and they chose to go that route of, oh, if I can be paid for this, I mean, might as well. I just think it's horrible that people even went to go see them. But I'd love to hear your theories on this one. Don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.